All right, we're going to take a journey, a trip way back in time to ancient Greece. We're going to try and figure out how a civilization born among these rocky islands ended up laying the groundwork for, well, so much of our world today. So let's just dive right in with the big question.
It's a pretty amazing question when you stop and think about it, right? I mean, how did a place with so many natural challenges, not a lot of farmland, mountains everywhere, become this incredible cradle for revolutionary ideas in art, culture, and politics? Well, the answer is a fantastic story of creativity basically being born out of necessity. And look, to really get the Greeks, you first have to understand their home. Their entire civilization, everything they became, was fundamentally shaped by the land and the sea right at their doorstep. So picture this. The Greek mainland threw a huge challenge at them. You've got these rugged mountains that make farming a real struggle, and not a ton of natural resources. So what do? Well, the early Greeks came up with a brilliant solution. They turned to the sea. The Mediterranean Sea wasn't seen as a barrier. It was a highway. It was their gateway to trade, to meeting new people, and to an exchange of ideas that would eventually forge this incredible shared culture. And you know, the first great civilization to really master this environment? The Minoans. These folks weren't just surviving, they were thriving. They were incredibly sophisticated artists and builders who created something absolutely remarkable on the island of Crete. The very heart of their world was a place called Knossos. Not only was it their capital, but it's also considered the oldest city in all of Europe. This was the spot supposedly ruled by the legendary King Minos, where this vibrant culture just flourished. And honestly, we'd know almost nothing about it if it wasn't for an English archaeologist, Arthur Evans, who started digging up the site way back in 1899. The Minoans were absolute masters of the fresco. This is a really tricky painting technique where you have to work on wet plaster. But the results? These stunningly vibrant murals that have somehow survived for thousands of years, giving us this precious little window into their world. We can see everything from dolphins and sea life to these elaborate ceremonies, and even important designs like the figure-of-8 shield, which gives us clues about their culture.
So yeah, their art tells us so much about what they saw and what they cared about. But what about what they thought? You know, what were their laws, their histories, their poems and stories? How do we get inside their heads and access their world beyond just the paintings?
And this is where we hit a wall, a huge one. The Minoans had a writing system, we call it Linear A. But to this day, it remains one of history's great unsolved mysteries. Nobody has been able to decipher it. So while we can see their world, we literally can't read their story. And that silence makes their sudden disappearance from history feel even more profound.
But of course, every story has its turning point. And for the Minoans, that moment was incredibly dramatic and final. It was marked by the arrival of a brand new, much more militaristic power coming from the mainland.
Okay, I want you to remember this year, 1400 BCE. This isn't just some random date on a timeline. It really represents a critical, transformative moment that would completely reshape the balance of power in the Aegean Sea. Right around 1400 BCE, the Mycenaeans, who were from the Greek mainland, conquered Crete. And just like that, this incredibly sophisticated, artistic Minoan civilization came to a pretty abrupt end. This event ushered in a whole new era, one dominated by a more warlike culture. Now, after the age of the Mycenaeans, something new, and maybe even more influential, started to take shape. This became the foundation of what we now call classical Greece, and it all centered around this totally revolutionary political innovation.
And that innovation was the polis. And we often translate that as city-state, but it was so much more than that. The polis was the entire framework for their society, their culture, their identity. It wasn't just about the place you lived, it was who you were. It was this radical new idea about how citizens could organize themselves and actually participate in their own government.
And this concept, the polis, had a really clear physical and social structure, basically organized around two main areas. First, you had the Acropolis. This was the fortified hilltop, the high ground, that served as the religious center and a safe place to retreat to in times of danger. And then, step two, you had the Agora. This was the open marketplace down below. And this was the real heart of the city. Commerce, politics, daily social life. It's where citizens argued, traded, and truly lived. This brilliant two-part structure gave shape to both the physical city and the very idea of citizenship itself.
So, when you look back from the early artistic vision of the Minoans all the way to the political structures of the classical Greeks,
you can actually see the foundations of our own world being laid, piece by piece.
And if we put it all into perspective, you can really see two distinct legacies. The Minoans, they left their mark primarily in the world of art and culture with those amazing frescoes. Then, later, the classical Greeks kind of built on top of that cultural foundation, and they're the ones who gave us the polis, a blueprint for politics and society that has been echoing through history ever since.
So at the end of the day, whether you're in a museum staring at a piece of art, or you're in a town hall meeting discussing civic life, the legacy of these ancient foundation builders is truly all around us. Their ideas on art, culture, and politics, they're not just dusty old history. They are a living, breathing part of our civilization today.
So I'll just leave you with this question to chew on. From the value we place on art to the very way we structure around communities, what part of the ancient Greek world do you see still living and breathing in yours today?